A soft green halo hangs in the dark, patient as breath on glass. You and I take the first quiet look together, eyes slow, shoulders easy. What if the steadiness you see is enough for tonight? I'll be your sleepy scientist, keeping the voice even and low. Set the room the way you like it. If it helps, slip on gentle headphones and nudge your phone into Do Not Disturb. There's a playlist waiting, like a dim walkway. You can return to it whenever you wish. No urgency here. Only a calm lane through space, unspooling at a human pace. We'll touch a few instruments by name, then let them fade back into the dark. We'll step around the noisy words and keep the simple ones that carry well. I'll point to the light, describe the edges, and let the center stay quiet. When a thought feels sharp, we'll round it. When a detail crowds the mind, we'll set it down and pass softly by. The story holds, even when we loosen our hands. If your eyelids grow heavy, let them. The tale will go on without needing you to hold it up. Think of a small lantern far away, drawing a thin path across a field of stars. It neither hurries nor lingers. It simply continues, and we breathe with it. The halo waits. The path is steady. We begin. I guide your gaze the slow way, edge first, then inward. A dim green halo rests on black, soft as chalk dust caught in light. Stars behind it keep their tiny, sharp voices. The traveler itself is quieter than both. Follow the rim with me, a patient circle. Notice how the brightness thickens towards the center and loosens again as your eye crosses out into the dark. That gentle swell and fade is the shape of a coma, and tonight it looks unhurried. Now let the eye step from sky to instruments and back again. Pan stars gathers points and times, turn emotion into a ledger line you can trust without clutching it. JWST listens deeper, where warmth has longer wavelengths and rock, ice, or dust each give off their own careful signatures. Between them, a path is drawn, first as predictions, then as confirmations. I place a fingertip on that path and feel no rush beneath it. It is simply where the numbers meet the night. The sun is busy far away, but busy does not mean chaotic. SDO watches the surface in ultraviolet, counting bright knots and the flares that ride above them. Forecasts speak of peaks and lulls, of days when charged particles run faster along long magnetic lanes. Here, with our traveler, what you and I meet is regular motion, not because storms are small, but because distance and scale turn loud energy into a softer pressure across a large room. I note the light. I do not ask it to be louder than it is. We can stay with gentleness and still hold the physics. Sunlight pushes, gravity steers. Pressure from photons is real but slight. A handful of micronewtons per square meter near Earth's orbit that falls with distance, and it asks for area to do its work. An object that is dense and compact does not give much sail to that push, and when it moves quickly, its momentum becomes a steadying weight. Nothing magic. Only a balance where one force speaks in a whisper, while another speaks in a low, even tone. Think of how a desk lamp brightens your page, while the floor beneath you keeps your chair from sliding. Both act, and yet one decides the path you take across the room. Let me bend your attention to how we know the path is steady without claiming perfection. Every position we record is compared with the curve the equations propose. The tiny differences are called residuals, and they live in arc seconds, in fractions of a blink. We look for patterns that would tell us a breath of extra push is at work, Most nights, the points scatter the way honest measurements do. On a few nights, a breeze of atmosphere or a calibration note leaves a smudge, and we mark it so it doesn't pretend to be the sky. Across weeks and instruments, the small offsets do not gather in one direction, and that is what steadiness feels like when it wears numbers. Now, a minute with nothing to prove. Fan motors hum at the far edge of the room, and a display lowers its brightness until it is the kind of glow you can forget while still seeing by it. My chair answers the floor with a soft rasp. The air has that clean, cool smell rooms get when machines keep their own weather. On the screen, the halo holds its tint, and the fixed stars look like tiny pins through dark cloth. They do not move while the traveller slides a hair's width between frames. Breath evens. A clock on the wall counts impatient clicks that never try to keep up with the sky. If your eyes close for a few of those clicks, the path will still be there when you open them. Nothing urgent is waiting in the corners. The quiet halo remains, and the room accepts it. We return to colour because colour is a kind of touch. Green in coma often comes from molecules that glow when sunlight shakes them. Diatomic carbon giving off a soft hue, sometimes joined by oxygen's narrow line. It is a clue, not a verdict, about the materials at work. The light says some gas is here, but not in torrents, and the steadiness of the motion agrees with that tone. I watch the core for any sharp change that would hint at a jet tugging one side more than the other, and the edge stays round. In the second half of nights like this, when attention tires of names and values, I let the scene do the speaking, because a stable circle on a stable path can teach without hurry, and because a soft line drawn across many evenings is often truer than a single loud moment that asks to be remembered for its volume instead of its shape. Before we leave this frame, let the gaze drift once more. Rim, center, rim, dark. The green lifts, then thins, and the stars reclaim the field with their colder white. Colour loosens into near blue at the very edge, and the night becomes clear again. I keep time by machines tonight. The room has its steady hum, and every instrument adds a soft beat to it. A clock face would be too sharp for this work. I prefer the slower rhythm of detectors warming to their tasks. What rhythm suits the night? The answer arrives as a sequence of quiet signals. First, SDO marks the downbeat. Its ultraviolet eyes watch the sun's surface, where loops lift and settle, exposure after exposure, a cadence measured in seconds rather than minutes. The data do not shout. They arrive with the composure of practiced breath, showing bright knots as they rise, soften, and fall back into the star's wide weather. When the frames are stacked, the motion becomes a melody line, persistent, useful, and never in a hurry to impress. I note the measure and let it pass through, like a metronome set low enough to calm the hand. Then SOHO holds the middle tone. A coronagraph hides the sun so the surrounding glow can be studied, and on that dark disk the outer light swells and recedes with the day's mood. You could imagine a symbol if you wanted one, but the stainless truth is gentler. Instruments listening for structure and change, recording both without judgment. Long streams of images make the solar wind visible in the patient way only accumulation can achieve. No crescendo is demanded, the score is long, and every bar adds to understanding. Closer in, Parker Solar Probe keeps the whisper track. Its instruments count particles and trace electric and magnetic fields where the wind is young and quick, sending back packets at a tempo that reminds me of someone tapping lightly on a desk to stay awake. There is a thrill in knowing those measurements come from regions where heat and motion are crowded together. Yet the result we receive is still a modest cadence of numbers that can be folded into models without fanfare. Near the star, the music is busy. In our room, the playback is calm. Between the two, distance works like a good hallway, damping echo and leaving just the part you can use. Far from the sun's bright plane, another voice joins. JWST in the infrared, more like a low note than a bright chime. Miri listens for warm dust. NIRSpec sorts light into lines and bands that tell you about molecules and grains, and the spectra plot themselves like careful staff paper, where each feature sits in its own place. I do not ask for perfection. I ask for repeatable signals that a tired mind can trust. Infrared work has its own tempo, longer exposures, quieter backgrounds, a patience that suits late hours. When the file arrives, it slides into the mix with the same even presence as the others, neither eager nor shy. On the ground, the surveys keep a walking beat. Pan-STARRS catches the traveller on many nights, counting the tiny shift against fixed stars, and the measurements move along to the honest rhythm of weather, moonlight, and scheduling. The Rubin Observatory rehearses its cadence, wide fields planned to sweep and return, a deliberate striding meant to cover the sky as a practice of steady steps. It comforts me to think of telescopes across the world handing the night from one to the next as the Earth turns, a relay with no finish line, only good handoffs and clean exchanges. Astrometry feeds into orbit solvers, and that too is a rhythm. Fit, check, update, rest. There is a beat that lives inside the data themselves. Counts gather in pixels, timestamps sit beside them. Calibration frames subtract and divide until the signal stands like a tone held just long enough to be clear. Dark frames hush the sensor's own voice, flats tune the field. Then the stars and the traveller speak in aligned measures that can be compared night over night. The orbit exists as a quiet refrain beneath all the parts, the same interval repeating, the same pace emerging as more notes join. If a different instrument tried to push the line aside, the score would show it with a small, persistent drift, and we would lower the volume on our confidence until the mix made sense again. When multiple instruments share a chart, the sound thickens but does not blur. Solar monitors describe the source, solar wind samplers report the medium, infrared spectrographs sketch the material's response, and ground-based surveys give the positional beat. And together, because their tempos are different, yet compatible, the composition becomes the kind that fills a room without crowding it. The kind that lets a person loosen their shoulders and keep listening even while sleep ruffles the edge of attention. And the kind that, through sheer steadiness, convinces you that a path traced across days and weeks can be trusted more deeply than any single loud moment glowing in isolation. The machines never boast, they simply keep time. An hour of good data sounds like a fan that never wavers. A night of good data feels like late rain, regular, present, and very easy to live with. When I lay the tracks together and lower the brightness on the screens, the room itself seems to adopt the tempo. Keyboards wait, chairs are quiet, the air settles. In that atmosphere, you can hear the subtler part of the work, which is how patience turns measurements into knowledge, and knowledge into the gentle assurance that a steady orbit is not a surprise, but a well-kept promise. Now, let everything recede into near silence. Cooling lines murmur, drives spin a narrow band of sound you notice only when you try to. Somewhere a power supply adds a faint, clean whine that never wanders. I slow my breathing to match the room, 1 count in, 2 counts out. On the screen, a short list scrolls. Instrument, file name, time. The list does not hurry to the end. It has learned the pace of the night. If your eyes prefer to close here, let them and keep only the feeling that the machines are working on your behalf without asking for attention. They will keep the beat for both of us while the stars continue their larger measure. When you return, the rhythm will still be here, waiting where you set it down. And at the margin of the display, the spectrograph ticks once. What keeps a traveller steady? A good pace, a sure pull, and not much to push it aside. That is the whole answer in a miniature, yet we can walk it, step by step, until the path feels familiar underfoot. I keep the voice low while we take that measured step together. Start with the pull. 2 bodies and a clean curve. The sun's gravity lays out a route, and the traveller follows the arc the way a careful hiker follows a worn footpath. When the speed on arrival from deep space is high enough, the path is not a closed loop, but a wide-open bend, the kind navigators call hyperbolic. There is even a quiet number for how much extra speed the traveller carries after the turn, hyperbolic excess velocity, a way to say that the journey continues outward even when the nearest star has already taken its share of the guiding. Think of it as a planned crossing rather than a destination. The itinerary is not a circle. It is a transit that respects the curve and then moves on. Now, the push. Sunlight has momentum, and the pressure it exerts near Earth's distance is tiny but real, micropascals pressing on every square meter. To that gentle press, shape and size matter. A broad sail would feel more of it. A compact body offers less to catch. Mass matters too. A heavy traveller with a small profile keeps its pace like a long train that doesn't notice a light breeze through the station. So the push is there, but the step remains measured, because the push is small, the area to mass is modest, and the path is already set by gravity's larger hand. There is another kind of push to consider: outgassing. I picture a jet on one side acting like a tiny thruster, adjusting the stride by fractions, and the math has names for those nudges. Orbit fitters fold them into parameters that describe a forward shove, a sideways lean, or a tilt out of the plane. If the traveller sheds gas strongly and unevenly, those terms grow, and the path's bend must be remeasured to stay honest. But when activity is low, the invisible thrusters idle or sputter only now and then, and the overall route continues to read like a long, even road with no real need to add detours to the map. On nights like these, the curve holds and the stride looks unbroken. How do we tell whether these small forces have started to guide the feet instead of the grander pull? We compare where the traveller is seen to, where the traveller would be, if only gravity spoke. The tiny differences, residuals, become our breadcrumbs. If they scatter without a direction, we keep walking. If they begin to fall to one side of the path again, and again, We pause and ask whether a new breeze has risen or an old assumption has wandered. Sometimes the trail markers are fooled by a bit of haze, a seeing blur, a calibration frame that needs rework, a lens that wants a gentler temperature. We honor those possibilities first, because humility is part of safe travel in long distances. Confidence grows with company. When two observatories agree, it is like two hikers pointing at the same cairn. When 3 or 4 agree across different longitudes and skies, the route ahead looks better than good. It looks repeatable. We add a few photometric lines to watch for brightness swings that would hint at a burst of gas, then watch them relax into their usual small wander, night to night. We keep a ledger of positions with times that feel like steady mile markers. The fit improves. The map and the ground shake hands without needing to squeeze. There is a pace to the calculations themselves, a march that never breaks into a run. Each new point updates the curve. Each update gives us a revised itinerary. And with every revision, the band of uncertainty narrows the way a dirt road narrows into a single lane as the hills grow calm, until the remaining questions are about pebbles and not about cliffs. And the traveller continues with a posture that suggests the earlier miles taught good habits, and the later miles will merely confirm them, unless something genuinely new steps into the way. Another body's gravity, an unexpected outburst, a geometry that amplifies a tiny shove into a visible drift. So the measured step becomes a theme you can feel. It is there when sunlight pushes, but cannot lead. It is there when gas leaves, but it does not turn the stride. It is there when numbers from faraway domes match the numbers from a quiet hill near home. I like that feeling because it trades drama for trust. A traveller moving at a healthy clip, with enough momentum to keep course after the bend, will not stumble because of a light wind, and will not veer because of a brief, small exhale from its own surface. That does not make the journey trivial, it makes it legible, and legible paths are the kind you can walk even when your eyes are heavy, and your thoughts prefer to trail a step behind. I keep a small room in my mind where these ideas arrange themselves on a table like a modest route plan. Here is gravity, the long road. Here is radiation pressure, a faint crosswind. Here are the outgassing terms, small side notes penciled in the margin. Here are the measurements, the mileposts already passed. If any of the notes swell, the route changes. If they remain minor, the route holds. With that plan in place, I look again at the sky and see a pace that does not need correction. A sequence of positions that would have surprised me only if I had expected the world to be louder than it usually is. What remains is a simple companionship with the traveller. We do not urge, we accompany. Where the curve bends, we bend our attention with it. Where the line straightens, we let our breath match the unbroken stretch. If a new influence arrives, we will recognize it not by a shout, but by a gradual leaning of the mileposts, the way a path slowly trends to the left after a gate you barely noticed. Until then, the cadence is steady, the itinerary clear, and the measured step holds. Isn't that a fine way to move through the night? I keep a postcard in my mind from a late hour when the control room was dim and the sky looked newly washed. A flare had already unfurled somewhere on the sun's face earlier that day, and yet here the traveller's position fell where the curve said it would, like a soft speck returning to a familiar place in the dark. The air held the feeling of a hush thinning at the edges, as if a veil had lifted just enough that you could see the outlines without leaning forward. For a breath, let everything quiet into a still weave. Screens lower their brightness until they feel like pale windows. Air handlers move a small tide of coolness that never rises to a draft. A pen rests without rolling. My own breathing keeps to a slow pattern, in and out, matching the room's settled carry. Nothing insists. The hush thins a little more, and in that clarity the field shows a neat scatter of stars and the faint blur we follow, unstartled, unhurried. When I return from that small drift, I turn the postcard over and write what the day held. A burst from the solar surface sent a bright front outward, and the coronagraph sketched its outline as it expanded and softened. Near the source, structure looks sharp. Edges, loops, bright knots like folds in a pale curtain. But farther out, the sheet of particles spreads, the way a cloud loses its firmness as it crosses an open valley. The farther the front travels, the more this valley grows, and with that growth, the weight of the event per square place in space becomes gentler. What began with clear borders relaxes into a broader, finer mist, and in that finer state, the pressure it can lay across a small, dense body is closer to a breath than to a shove. I'm careful not to call it nothing. A breath still moves through a room. It simply doesn't move the furniture. Another line for the back of the card. The steady wind that carries the sun's outflow thins with distance in a way that makes sense to anyone who has watched fog break apart as morning widens. Where the air is close to the source, the fog looks like a wall. Where the air has room, the fog draws into streaks and tatters that feel less heavy against your skin. Measurements near the star outline the crowded part of this weather. Farther away, monitors and models agree that the same flow feels lighter by the same rule that governs how spreads become soft as the circle widens. What this means for our quiet traveller is not a promise of perfect calm, but a simple expectation that the push arriving at its surface is finer, less able to gather itself into a lasting tilt. The hush that began as a compact veil becomes a faint drift across a wide field, and most nights that drift is not the sort that leaves prints. I let the idea stand until it becomes plain, because plain ideas carry best when eyes are heavy. You may wonder how that softening meets inertia, and how the two decide on the night's outcome. I hold both thoughts at once. On one side, the fine press of light and the thinning rime of particles. On the other, the traveller's mass and pace, both of which lend it the habit of continuing, so that even when a faint haze tries to lean across its course, the lean cannot do more than touch the surface before it dissolves, and the path that remains is the one gravity drew long before any haze had formed, a path that has been checked by night after night of positions falling where they should, and by the quiet fact that when small forces act briefly and in passing, their footprints fade beneath the larger steady pull that does not tire, does not vary with weather, and does not require anyone to stay up and hope on its behalf. After the activity, we look for signs that the veil did more than pass. Positions are measured, compared with the curve, and the leftover crumbs, the residuals, are read with the care you would give to tracks in light frost. If the hush had gathered itself into a firmer band and pushed a little, we would expect the crumbs to begin falling to one side, not stubbornly, not like a march, but with the sort of bias that a patient eye learns to trust. Instead, what arrives is the usual scatter that honest measurements wear, some points close, a few a bit wide, all of them bounded by the same small oval that held the others, and no sign that the frost remembers a heel print where none should be. On another line of the card, I write the brightness curve, because light can betray a sudden exhale if there was one, and tonight the curve is modest, unruffled by spikes, more akin to the way a bit of ground steam lifts when morning warms. Not absent, simply not organized into a plume with a direction you could name. All of this reads as after weather, air that keeps its crispness, a veil that has thinned into nothing you would call a force, and a traveller that steps where it was already stepping. It comforts me that the picture does not need heroics. Distance does much of the work. Geometry lends a hand. The traveller's build does the rest. None of this promises that every day must be like this one, only that many days will be, and that our habit of looking will make the exceptions clear if they arrive. Meanwhile, the hush keeps thinning at the edges, and in that thinning, the kind of certainty we can live with grows, not the theatrical kind that tries to name absolutes, but the patient kind that marks each small agreement between sky and equation and files it with the others until the drawer is full enough that you can reach in by feel and know what you'll touch. I note this, close the card, and let the scene rest where it began. A dim blur in a clean field, returning like clockwork, not because clocks demand it, but because large, steady pulls and fine, passing veils know how to share a sky without quarrel. At the edge of the room, the wall clock's second hand clears another mark, and the hush grows thin enough that you can almost see through it to the next quiet scene. At 02:14, the room remembers how to breathe. The room begins as a hush you can hear. Air slips through vents in an even draw. A fan keeps a narrow ribbon of sound. Somewhere, a relay clicks once and forgets it did. Nothing sharp, nothing bright, only the soft floor noise of a quiet watch. Outside the walls, the solar wind is its own long whisper, pressure spread thin over miles upon miles, a weather you do not feel on skin. Inside, we let the ear set a pace slow enough to carry us like a small boat sliding from pier to channel without tug or horn. Colour returns as a tide. The coma wears a faint green the way shallow water holds a seam of glow just after sunset. Not a glare, just a patient wash that comes and goes with the angle. I trace its edge and think of undertow and surface drift. One part that moves, one part that seems to stand, and the whole scene steady enough that you can read it, while your thoughts loosen their knots. Against the fixed stars, our traveller moves a finger's width from frame to frame, leaving nothing like a wake, only the hint of a passage. That hint is enough for tonight. What gives the green its sea light? When sunlight shakes certain molecules, they answer with very particular hues. Diatomic carbon often sings in the swan bands near the green, and oxygen can add a narrow note around the same range. Sometimes ionized carbon monoxide paints edges here and there. None of this makes the object strange. It makes it fluent, a familiar member of small bodies whose gases glow when the star speaks. The glow, however, is more of a lantern on deck than a motor below, visible, calming, but not the thing that sets the course. So we let the colour tell us some gas, not much gas, and we keep our bearing. There is another part to the story that instruments in the infrared help us hear. Some comae show carbon dioxide as a strong player, especially when water stays quiet at cooler temperatures, and telescopes tuned to longer wavelengths have mapped that breath clearly in several recent targets. If a traveller carries more of that colder, patient gas than the usual mix, its outflow can be steadier, its changes slower, and its brightness less eager to surge. I do not claim this as a label for the one before us. I set it nearby on the chart, as a chart notes safe channels and shoals without insisting that every keel will pass the same line. You and I are reading a harbour guide at night, and the safest advice is to watch the buoys and confirm them as we go. When gas leaves unevenly, it can act like a crosswind against the hull. Orbit fitters have names for those small shoves, and they appear as gentle drifts along 3 principal axes, each one the kind of nudge that, over time, would bend a plotted line if it were both present and persistent. Here, the curve keeps meeting the marks as though the current is even and the rudder centered. Whatever leaves the surface is either little or balanced, or both, so torque does not turn the bow. Mass helps, speed helps, and the modest area presented to the star helps as well, all of it combining into a vessel that tracks well through small chop. So even when a pocket of warmer sunlight passes, you do not feel a yaw, and even when a thin puff escapes, it fades before it can tug the heading into a new lane, because the great pull ahead remains steady and the ship has learned to hold it. How does this compare to another visitor we have known? A few years back, a different interstellar traveller showed a livelier surface, brighter dust, and a more robust tail. Its brightness curve swelled and eased the way a swell lifts and drops a hull in open water. That one felt like crossing a channel with more wind in it, and the reduction teams folded those behaviours into their fits with care. Tonight our scene is quieter. The trace is thin, the green modest, the position markers falling into place like buoys at even intervals. It isn't better or worse, only a different sea state, and we sail accordingly. Set the papers down. Let the room fill with a stillness that has its own small currents. Air moves like a long exhale and does not refill in a hurry. A distant drive spins a note, so even it becomes background, like low swell sliding under a hull at night. A chair answers the floor with a soft scrape, and then learns the room's silence again. You hear the faintest tick as a detector ends an exposure. You do not need to chase it with thought. A pencil rolls a quarter turn and stops against a notebook's spine. From the corridor, a door eases closed without latching. The lights dim one notch and hold. Breathe in once, slow as a tide filling a sheltered cove. Breathe out twice as long, the way a cove empties its slack water, without hurry, without noise. Nothing needs deciding. The traveller keeps its heading, the night keeps its weather. Our small craft drifts in place, unmoored from clocks, rocking on sounds, so even they vanish as soon as you notice them. I start as close as the sensor allows. 1 square among thousands carries a few extra counts, and I let your eyes settle on that small rise. Between bias, dark and flat, the pixel remembers what is not the sky, and then what is left begins to resemble a point. Plate scale turns the pixel's width into an angle the sky understands. A cluster of such points, gathered over minutes, draws a pinprick that shifts just enough to be alive. From that stitch, a path can be embroidered. Now I widen the frame by a hand's breadth. The point is no longer lonely, because a net of catalogue stars has been thrown across the field to hold it steady. Each reference star gives the fabric a fixed thread, and with enough of them, the cloth does not sag. Astrometry is the art of laying this mesh flat. Match, solve, check, and only then sew the traveller's mark into place. If a breeze of atmosphere ruffles the cloth, you can see it as the scatter widens. If a lens cools and tightens, the weave smooths in response. Either way, the stitch is registered with the care you give to fine seams. A little wider, and forces begin to show as textures. Gravity is the loom. The sun is the strong warp running end to end. Planets add gentler weft, crossing the main pull with subtle threads that can shift a path by just enough to notice if you keep careful books. Most of the time, those crossings produce a uniform cloth. But if the geometry lines up, near a giant, near resonance, near a node, you feel the pattern thicken. The traveller answers without drama, curving where the weave encourages a curve, and moving on when the motif returns to plane. It is not an argument, it is a pattern that repeats. There are lighter threads laid on top of this cloth. Solar radiation pressure is one, a fine filament that pulls along the direction of light, small but present, most visible to broad, thin shapes with little weight behind them. It is measured in micronewtons per square meter and fades with distance, so a compact, dense body contributes very little sail to that tug. You can model the filament's effect by assigning a coefficient that tells the solver how reflective or absorptive the surface is, how likely it is to take the light's touch as a nudge. In many cases that coefficient stays small, and the filament lies on the fabric like silk you can see but barely feel. When it grows, we notice it by a soft drift that will not center. Heat can write its own faint pattern. Small bodies warmed by the sun can re-radiate that heat unevenly, trading photons with a timing that adds a minute thrust, the kind that nudges drifters over years into new lanes. We give those effects names that sound like workshop tools, but they are really delicate stitches that only matter for stones with long exposures to light and a habit of hold-in warmth on one side. For our traveller, moving fast and seen over months rather than decades, such stitches are unlikely to thicken the cloth beyond what our current fingers can feel. Still, the thought is placed on the edge of the table, waiting for any sign the seam has risen. Patience keeps it there without fuss. Error does not vanish, it gathers in shapes we can describe. After a fit, what remains is not a shrug. It is an ellipse, the covariance. That tells you how the next stitch is expected to land. Longer in one direction, shorter in another, a texture of uncertainty that belongs to the fabric rather than to your mood. With more nights, the ellipse contracts and the weave appears finer. With fewer nights, it relaxes and lets the thread wander more. Cross-instrument work tightens the knots. Independent fields, different optics, varied seeing, all stitched together so systematics cannot pretend to be sky. When the ellipses align and shrink in concert, confidence becomes a physical sensation, like running a fingertip across cloth and feeling no snags. If a snag forms, it repeats. If it does not repeat, it was a catch in the needle, not the fabric. I lean back to let the whole piece show at once. Here is the warp of gravity, straight and strong. Here are the planetary wefts passing under and over. Here lie the light filaments that are thin enough to move with breath. Here in the margin are the small thermal stitches that rarely change the pattern quickly. And across all of it, the seam of measured points runs like a careful joining line, simple even, and willing to accept new stitches without puckering, because the hand sewing it refuses to pull too hard, and because the cloth itself is large, forgiving, and meant to bear weight without twisting. A design proven by every night we widen the frame and find the new marks where the loom said they would be. Wide enough now that the object is a traveller again, rather than a dot. The orbit solver becomes a weaver's draft. Inputs on one side, a pattern emerging on the other, and between them, rules the loom cannot ignore. If the thread of outgassing were to thicken, you would see a bias to one edge of the seam. If the light filament grew stronger than the draft assumes, the line would lean as though a loose stitch were pulling. Instead, the seam keeps its straightness within the accepted texture, thick enough to be real, thin enough to remain subtle. Night after night, I place new stitches in their rows and feel for a wrinkle with each pass. The cloth lies flat. Even the long seams, the ephemeris stretched forward, sit calmly on the table, and the chalk marks that suggest where the needle should enter next land close to where the needle does, which is the quiet kind of satisfaction you get from a well-kept pattern rather than from a flourish. When I pull the frame back to the horizon, the fabric becomes a sky again, and our traveller steps along the larger weave with no snare in its heel. Telescopes hand off the needle from one night to the next. Spectrographs add a thin ribbon at the edge. Solar monitors keep watch on distant threads that might brush the cloth. The counts turn to positions, the positions to a path, the path to a forecast that can be folded and carried in a pocket for the next watch, while the loom runs on with or without us, and our task is nothing more theatrical than keeping the tension even and the stitches honest until the piece is long enough to set aside and admire for its quiet regularity. I dim the displays, note the latest seam, and breathe with the room as the fans keep their low music, the servers count in soft ticks, and the fabric holds its shape, because the pattern is sound, the hands are patient, and the night is willing to be worked at a human pace until the next stitch slides into place. The count steady, and if the night brightens with news of solar weather, then I lower the lights and round the tone of every word. If a monitor glows with a fresh alert, then I let that glow be simply a glow, not a verdict. If your shoulders lift at the thought of storms, then we set them down together like placing a lamp gently on a steady table. Light teaches by degrees, not by demands. I keep that lesson close. For a short while, we do nothing but let the room become dim and kind. Indicator LEDs soften to tiny embers. Screens drift toward dusk. A fan draws a long, even breath that never reaches a draft. A lens cap catches a thin sheen from a nearby panel, and then even that sheen fades. Keys wait in their small matte silence. Carpet fibers swallow reflections until only a narrow bar of grey lies beneath the door. Somewhere, a relay offers one polite spark of light and is gone. This is enough ambience to hold us without adding weight. When the gauges talk about storms, they are talking in the language of brightness and disturbance. If the index climbs, then space near our world is livelier, and the auroras on the far curves of Earth may grow in grace. If fields twist, then particles stream more quickly along those twists and make delicate mischief where they are invited. But if the traveller is far, and if the beam that reaches it arrives spread thin across a great dome, then even a lively source becomes a quiet lamp at a distance. Brightness dilutes, shimmer turns to sheen. The measured gleam still reads as measured. I think in conditional steps because they match the way light behaves. If a source is twice as far, then its influence is quartered, and if it is farther still, then the quartering repeats until push becomes presence more than pressure. If the object does not offer much surface to catch the beam, then the beam's suggestion becomes smaller yet. And if beneath that small suggestion there is substantial mass moving with a confident pace, then the line of motion favours its earlier intent. In this register, sunlight is a painter, gravity the canvas beneath. The painting can brighten and dim, but the canvas holds the frame. Gas can write lines of light as well. If ices near the surface release a faint breath, then molecules glow, and we see the glow as a hush of green. And if that release is balanced around the body, then the glow is mostly colour and not a turning hand. If a jet forms, then its light is a stroke that leans, and overnights that lean would compound into a visible bias in the positions we chart. But if the light stays round and modest, and if brightness walks rather than runs from one frame to the next, then the hidden forces that might tilt the motion remain small enough to fold into the background of understanding without changing the headline we carry forward. Light speaks, and tonight it says steady. Our ledgers learn from the sky in the same calm steps. If the measurements land to both sides of a predicted line, then we nod and keep fitting. If they begin to favour one side, then we consider whether the sky has tilted or our tools have blinked. If two telescopes agree in their scatter, then we thank them. If three agree, then we let our certainty brighten a shade. If a run of clear nights shows no new lean, then the non-gravitational whispers remain whispers, and the gravitational tone continues to carry. And if a small drift presents itself, then we take our time, add a parameter, test it, and only then tell the story in a slightly warmer light. There is also the question of what you do with your own attention. If headlines glow with large words, then we adjust the dimmer on those words and ask what portion of their light actually falls on the traveller we keep. If the answer is less than the noise between two careful nights, then we let the larger glow be beautiful where it belongs, high above our poles, and we return to the narrow beam that matters here. If the beam holds, then we hold. This habit does not deny energy its spectacle. It merely declines to confuse spectacle with guidance. Now the long, quiet hinge of the chapter. If the storm swells at the source, then monitors sing. If the swell becomes an outward front, then coronagraphs sketch its bright shell. If the shell travels for great spans, then its brightness thins and its push lightens. If, along the way, it wanders wide of the traveller's lane, then the traveller receives little more than an altered glow on its skin. If, by geometry, a brush does occur, then the brush is short and soft, and the record it leaves is smaller than the roughness that honest measurements already carry from air and glass and time. So the curve we trust remains the curve we use, and the path does not ask to be redrawn. I keep one more pair of conditions near the front of the desk. If the object were to change its own light, brighten sharply, flicker, grow a lopsided rim, then I would expect the fit to tug in a direction that couldn't be blamed on the atmosphere of any single dome. But if the rim stays even, and the magnitude wanders within the usual small bounds, then we chalk the night down as another instance of the same measured gleam. If the next night agrees, and the next after that, then the pattern draws itself until our explanations can simply trail the drawing instead of pulling it along. This is how patience becomes a tool, not a delay, but a way to let light tell the truth at its own comfortable pace. You might wonder where you belong in these if and then steps. If your eyes grow heavy before the last condition resolves, then the sky will keep working without you. If your breath slows, then it will match the slow brightening and dimming of screens as they cycle through their duties. If you fall asleep, then the narrative remembers its place, and when you return another time, it will still be here, changed by nothing but a few more careful positions, added to a curve that has shown itself willing to be ordinary. Ordinary in the best way, in the way that lets a person rest while science walks on softly. If you stay awake, then you will hear the same outcome arrive by a different route. The measured gleam holds. The night keeps its quiet lumen, the orbit keeps its line, the room keeps its peace. That is enough for tonight. I like to count softly when the sky gets loud. 1, 2, 3. Handrails for the mind, set at a comfortable reach so you can hold them without gripping. Each is simple, each is true, and together they make a quiet corridor you can walk even while drowsy. I keep the rhythm low, the way you might tap a fingertip on a tabletop to keep your place. The traveller moves, the numbers keep time. We listen for steadiness more than spectacle. First handrail. The sun has a cycle and prefers patterns to surprises. About every 11 years, activity rises and falls. The count of sunspots, the frequency of flares, the swell and ease of the wind. Instruments watch these measures like slow percussion, clocks for a star. When the count quickens, auroras answer near our world and the heliosphere grows busier. When it slows, the background hush returns. The details change nightly, but the drum itself is familiar, and familiarity allows calm. Knowing the beat helps us hear what belongs to the rhythm, and what would be a true change in tune. Between those beats, we borrow what the monitors tell us about the texture of the day. A burst may lift, a front may expand, a field may twist. The charts and coronagraphs sketch, the near-sun probes report, the summaries collect the notes. From here, we convert the loudness of the source to the softness at range, because distance is a volume knob the cosmos built in from the start. When we look back to the traveller, we do not ask whether the star was active. We ask how that activity was likely to sound at this seat in the hall. And most nights it sounds like air moving behind the walls, present, but not pushing the door. We mark the handrail again with a small tap and leave it in place. Second handrail, radiation pressure has a scale that favours patience. Light carries momentum. It pushes. Near Earth's distance, the push on a square metre is measured in micronewtons, a delicate force that fades as the square of the distance grows. Whether that whisper matters depends on two quiet traits: how much sail the object offers and how much mass sits behind the sail. A compact body with real weight keeps its line the way a well-balanced metronome keeps its tempo, even if you breathe near it. The breath exists. The tick does not change. We model reflectivity, absorption, and geometry. We let the solver hold those coefficients to the light, and we ask whether the tune bends at all while the beam plays across nights that are long and slow. There are times we speak this handrail out loud to be sure we believe it. At 1 unit of distance, push is already small. At 2, it is quartered. At 3, it is a ninth, and then smaller still. So unless the traveller spreads broad panels to the sun, the numbers remain the kind that live below the murmur of ordinary measurement. And unless it is unusually feathery for its size, momentum keeps a tempo that doesn't care for passing drafts, which is why the orbit, the true melody, stays where the notation says it should, even as the backing instruments warm and cool, rise and ease, flare and fade in a concert far louder at the stage than in the balcony where we sit tonight. Third handrail. Positions, carefully taken by many hands, agree or they don't. Astrometry is counting with light, tiny angles in a known frame, stitched to catalogues, corrected for the camera's quirks, checked against air and time. Residuals tell us whether those counts lean. When they scatter both sides of the line, we accept the fit. When they drift, we ask questions. A single dome can be fooled by weather. A pair can be fooled by chance. 3 or 4, spread wide, are hard to fool. At that point, the soft counting becomes a chorus, and the path gains the kind of depth only agreement can give. We keep the ledger honest by admitting the smudges, and by refusing to let any single mark do more bragging than it deserves. Now I bring the handrails to the traveller with the same small rhythm. 1. The star may be lively, but its liveliness thins with distance, so what reaches the object is mostly a change in light, not a change in course. 2. The light pushes, but the push is small and smaller still when the cross-section is modest and the mass is stout, so the push rarely composes more than a background murmur. 3. The nightly counts from different hills match within the honest uncertainties we expect, and their scatter does not show a trend that would require us to add a new instrument to the score. When all 3 taps land together, the result sounds like trust. You do not need to strain your ear to hear it. You feel it in your shoulders relaxing as you read the latest line and find it where you set the ruler yesterday. Across instruments, the corridor opens and stays straight. Solar watchers provide context. Near-sun samplers measure the weather before it travels. Infrared eyes describe what the material is doing with the light. Wide-field surveys fix where the traveller is and where it is headed. Each report arrives like a note, held just long enough to place, neither clipped nor showy, and the long piece they make together is the kind that fills a room gently rather than loudly, the kind that invites sleep to the threshold without closing the door on understanding, the kind that rewards consistency with a quiet confidence that is not pride so much as craft, the craft of steady work done at a human pace, while the heavens run on at their own longer tempo. I let the counting fade to a tap you can feel more than hear. 1 handrail, 2, 3. 1 ledger, 2, 3. 1 breath in, 2 breaths out. A timestamp joins the set. A magnitude joins. A right ascension and a declination. Then the small subtraction that makes a residual. And the residual joins the others on a line that falls where the last line did. And a single hue leads me along the night like a quiet waymark on a long road. The thin green line sits where the traveller sits, steady enough that my eyes learn its pace and my breath follows. I take it as a guide, not as a destination. Between one frame and the next, the same muted tint appears a finger's width along the charted route, and that repetition becomes a kind of path I can walk without hurry. The colour is not the journey, it simply points the way. I keep the image simple, sky dark, stars sharp, a small, round glow with a faint green skin. The centre stays calmer than the edge, as if the road's middle were smooth and the shoulders slightly dusted by light. Across minutes, the glow shifts against the fixed grid, and the route we mapped yesterday remains the route today. I let the colour do its modest job, helping the eye re-find the traveller, while the math keeps the deeper promise that a plotted course will welcome each new step. It is comfort without claim. Green in such a scene has everyday reasons. When sunlight shakes small carbon molecules, they answer with bands that fall near the green, and oxygen can add a narrow note in the same neighbourhood. Sometimes faint ions join, painting the edge a little brighter than the core. These are common companions on many nights like this. They tell you some gas more than much gas, and they sketch a boundary between material that glows and material too faint for the eye. I keep the tone factual, because knowing why a landmark has a certain colour doesn't turn the landmark into a driver of the trip. Colour helps you track. Motion belongs to gravity and momentum. Even a bright rim, if balanced, remains a marker, rather than a hand upon the shoulder. Dust and gas contribute differently to that rim, dust scattering sunlight broadly, gas shining in thinner lines. But either way, the look of the roadside does not push the car. I read the edge, then returned to the mileposts. Time, position, a small subtraction that leaves a residual like a pebble on the lane. The pebbles scatter both sides. The lane goes on. Another visitor from years ago made a noisier picture. That one wore a fuller skirt of light, brighter dust, more eager changes as it rounded the bend nearer the sun. Photometry rose and fell like hills in a gentle country, and the path remained a pass-through, but the scenery had more motion in it. By comparison, tonight's traveller feels like a straight stretch between towns. Same sign every mile, same calm pace, fewer detours. I prefer neither. I only note that different routes have different textures, and this one is smooth. Infrared instruments speak softly about what the material is doing with light at longer wavelengths. If emission looks even from one side to another, the surface may be sharing its warmth without sharp, hot spots. If it looks lopsided, a patch of activity might be present. Our files tonight do not insist on either picture, and that is its own kind of ease, a lack of evidence that keeps the route familiar. I keep that understanding on a card at the edge of the desk, useful if needed, happy to rest if not. The road remains the road. There is a quiet discipline in not letting colour claim more than it earns. A green halo can be pretty and helpful without becoming a story about cause. The cause of the motion we trust sits deeper. The pull of the star, the surplus of speed that guarantees an onward trek, the smallness of any push that might try to suggest a side street. So I let the thin green line be the painted stripe on the centre of the lane, a visible cue to stay oriented, while the engine that keeps us moving is the same one it has been all along. Landmarks matter. The road still leads. When I tally the night's travel, I do it in small, repeated steps that hold their shape. Apertures placed around the globe, background measured a little way off, counts turned into a magnitude that drifts only modestly. Positions fitted against a predicted route, the leftovers arrayed without bias. If a jet were on one side, if a spray favoured one quarter, the line of pebbles would tilt and keep tilting, and the curve would ask for a correction we would gladly test. Instead, the pebbles remain friendly, scattered fairly, as though the road's camber were even and the tyres well aligned. So I write one more note, steady within the usual bounds. Now, a still patch near the end of the segment, long enough to rest in and short enough to keep the lane in sight. Monitors dim to a dusk that lets the green stay visible without crowding the eyes. Air moves with a hush that neither rises nor falls. Cables relax into their arcs along the desk's back edge. Somewhere a server adds a faint, regular tick that would be a turn signal if we needed to turn. But we do not. The cursor blinks at an easy pace. On the screen, the circle of light holds the same small tint, and the road it suggests stays straight. A simple stretch you could walk with your eyes half closed, while the numbers do the driving, and the chapter learns how to coast the last few meters without stopping short or rushing the line. When I let my gaze soften, the colour thins towards the edge of the field, yielding to a paler wash that feels closer to night than to signal, and the signs along the route fade back into the quiet they came from, until the green loosens into a pale blue, almost a lullaby. I open the night like a ledger already dusted with quiet, the kind that takes pencil better than pen. The first lines hold weather, seeing, and a note about moonlight, each written small so the page keeps its calm. Mist in the parking lot drifts at ankle height, and the dome breathes a faint cloud as shutters part. Inside I mark the time, then write a single sentence. We will walk slowly through the data and not outrun the night. It is enough to set the pace. The traveller waits where it ought to be, a soft blur in a tidy patch of stars, and I let the moment settle before I count. Observed minus computed, then. I move along the log like a path edged with reflective tacks, each tack a position measured against the curve. The subtracting is simple. The comfort comes from where the crumbs fall. When they scatter without leaning, I breathe easier. When they lean, I pause and look for the mist I might have brought in on my own boots. Air mass changes, a guiding hiccup, a temperature step in the lens. Most tilts have earthbound explanations. The plot is a narrow lane with a faint fog over it. I bend close until the road lines are clear again, then step on. On another page, photometry enters like a slow pulse. Apertures circle the glow. Sky is sampled just far enough away to be honest. Counts become magnitudes, then a line that moves by small degrees. Spikes make themselves known quickly, as if someone coughed in a quiet hall. Dips arrive with equal candour. Most nights the line wanders inside a shallow basin that could hold dew, gentle, contained, and uninterested in drama. I write steady within usual bounds, underline once, and lift the pencil to keep from pressing a darker groove than the night deserves. Coverage matters on long walks. While the dome here inhales its portion of the sky, another dome far away exhales the same scene, and between them the mist of distance does us a favour. Parallax becomes context, and time zones braid into a rope the path can hold. Positions taken under a southern ceiling agree with those taken in northern air. A third sight hands in a page with similar scrawl. and the ledger grows confident without raising its voice. I note the handoffs, the weather notes, the shared catalogue underpinning it all, and I write fit updated, knowing the words mean less than the habit that produced them. The habit is the point. A slow walk is a thorough walk. Small anomalies have their own column. Here lives the image with a faint star tangled in the aperture, its light like a wisp of cloud that wanted to be part of the traveller's glow. Here sits the night with uncooperative thin cirrus, a veil that passed and left a smear on our confidence. Here rests the hour when a fan cycled and the temperature shifted by a few tenths, persuading a focus system to nibble at sharpness. I do not scold the data. I annotate it the way a mapmaker draws marsh symbols. The ground is still there, but you tread with care. By morning, the marshes shrink in importance because the high ground holds, and the route between cairns stays true. Now, a still piece of room to match the stillness outside. A dim bar of light rests along the desk's edge and does not move. The vent breathes a level thread of air that lifts a page corner just enough to prove it is paper. Far racks exhale a low tone that blends with the turn of a distant azimuth gear. The two sounds refuse to compete. Dust shines once in the beam, then disappears back into ordinary. I let the chair settle. I let the eyes lower their ambition. I let the seconds pass with nothing pressing against them. The night becomes a readable fog, thin and even, and the ledger enjoys being held open without being asked for more than it wishes to give. When the pause has done its work, I return to the slow walk that fills a page with honest lines and nothing theatrical. Bias frames subtract the sensor's own breath. Darks take away the warmth that cameras whisper into their counts. Flats smooth the field so the sky appears without creases. Plate solutions pin the scene to a grid older than this building. Catalogue stars lay down a scaffold. Centroids are coaxed from hum into clarity. Times are corrected to a shared standard. Residuals are drawn in pencil so mistakes can be softened without shame. And only then does the story accept another step forward in the form of a curve that drifts by millimeters on paper, but by millions of miles in space. A curve that keeps its posture, as though even the long folds of the universe were content to be formal when a small, steady traveller passes. The last checks favour humility. I widen the plot, then narrow it again, just to be sure the fog is not hiding a lean. I revisit earlier weeks to see whether a shallow drift has been staging a quiet return. It has not. I skim the notes from the other hills, where the same object walked through the same kind of night and left the same neat crumbs. The chorus is softened and full. You can walk the corridor by ear now, every door labelled, every echo tamed by carpet and care, and you arrive where you meant to without a single moment that asked you to hurry. This is the pace that reveals more than speed ever could. When I close the ledger, I do not close the night. The dome will keep turning, the servers will keep their count, the traveller will add another pebble to the line of pebbles. I take my hand off the page and feel the faint grain of paper where pencil met, it with a light touch. Mist slides past the slit and forgets itself on the other side. The corridor is dim and friendly. At the threshold of the dark field, I rest my hand on the frame. You who listen in the dark, I want to write you a small letter while the screens keep their watch. It doesn't have stamps or dates, only the even tone of a voice that prefers measured steps. I picture you as a passenger on the night water with me, the two of us watching a distant lantern ride a calm swell. No hurry in the keel, no reason to trim the sails just yet. Only the comfort of a course that keeps returning to itself. There is a word that seems sharper than the hour requires, so I will round it. Perihelion means the part of the voyage closest to the sun. Think of a buoy set nearer the bright harbour than any other. We pass by it once, give a nod, and continue along the long channel outward. Near that buoy, some travellers steam and froth, shed in spray that makes their heading twitch. Others slide by without fuss, the hull steady, the wake tidy, the logbook clean. Tonight's notes suggest we are watching the second kind. What would a change look like if one wished to make itself known? A sudden brightening would lift the crest of our light curve the way wind ruffles a previously glassy patch. A lopsided rim would hint at a side current, a subtle yaw that repeats across nights until even a sleepy navigator can feel it in the helm. On our charts, that yaw becomes a slow drift of pebbles to one shoulder of the lane. In the language of fitters, it grows into the small, named pushes they keep in reserve for just such weather. And if the traveller remained quiet, if the magnitude wandered only inside its usual basin and the rim stayed round, then our heading would keep to gravity's long groove, with nothing more than the ordinary undulation of open water. You should know how many hands keep this log. There are large ships with deep holds, survey observatories that sweep the horizon night after night. There are nimble skiffs, amateur telescopes that set out from backyards and hilltops, sending careful bearings to the harbour office. All of those bearings matter. When the harbour master tallies them, the channel becomes easier to read, because any one wake might be a trick of light, but a dozen wakes running parallel tell you what the tide is doing. Your attention is part of that fleet in a small way. By caring for the process, you help the voyage be well told. This is also where sleep and science share a deck. The mind rests more easily when the sea is charted and the hand on the tiller is steady. We are not promising a never-changing ocean. We are acknowledging that most nights are ordinary, and that ordinary carries you farther than any burst of drama. If your thoughts drift toward the rail, let them look at the small lantern ahead, the one we have followed for so many miles. It has not flickered. It keeps its pace. Even if you close your eyes, the lantern will continue to move along the same quiet seam in the water, and when you open them later, you will find it a little farther along, no explanation required, because the explanation is patience, and patience is seaworthy. Some worry that calm seas hide reefs. It is a good habit to check the chart again. That is why we return to the numbers every watch. Positions compared to predictions. Differences read like buoys at night. Left, right, never leaning too long in one direction. If they were to lean, we would mark the spot and lower the sail a touch while we tested a gentle correction, and we would not publish a new route until the wake drew it for us 3 nights in a row, because true changes are repeatable, and repeatable is the only captain we trust when the shipping lanes cross. There is a longer paragraph I owe you, and I will keep its voice slow. Through weeks and instruments, through equators and poles, the bearings have entered the ledger with the kind of consistency that makes a navigator quietly satisfied rather than loudly impressed. And in that consistency, the course plots forward with narrow bands of doubt. Bands that tighten when more bearings arrive from different coasts. Bands that relax when weather intervenes. And bands that, on the whole, confirm a voyage defined by the star's pull and the traveller's good speed, so that even when the harbour ahead brightens with solar weather and the pilings hum with the tide, our keel holds the centre of the channel, and our wake writes one thin line behind us that anyone can follow after dawn without needing to be told where it came from. I will finish the letter the way I began it, on the quiet water, with that small lantern steady ahead. No crisis to steer around. No call for more hands on deck. Only a course we can keep while our breathing softens and the night does its work. If you would like a parting reassurance, it is this. The logbook has many calm pages, and one more is being written even now. You can let your shoulders drop here. The sky does too. Night shift has its own texture, a fabric of faint blue screens and low machinery, stitched together by small lights that don't blink unless spoken to. The building rests on its foundation like cloth on a loom, taut enough to hold a shape, easy enough to work by hand. I sit where the threads cross. Instruments upstream, solvers downstream, a span of quiet in between where numbers settle before they are sewn. The woven watch keeps time without argument. Every so often, a status line prints a new word. It lands like a tidy stitch. Nothing frays. For a short while, let the room be only room. Cooling lines whisper along the floor and gather beneath the racks. A distant drive turns a narrow thread of tone. A kettle clicks once and forgets its own heat. A cup settles onto cardboard with a gentle nap sound. An indicator breathes a dim green through a mesh panel. Air moves in an even weft from a vent, and paper curls at the corner, then lies flat again. Eyes relearn a softer focus. Breath lengthens. The loom holds. Work returns as a cross-check of seams. Upstream watchers report their pieces. Solar monitors note the day's pattern. Near-sun probes sketch the medium. Ground surveys send positions. Small observatories add careful stitches from darker hills. I pull them into one cloth. Timestamps aligned, catalogues agreed, calibrations declared. Then let the solver lay a new seam along the warp we already trust. When the fresh seam overlays the prior one within the same narrow selvage, the table looks tidy. No bias tugging toward an edge, no ripple asking for a rethreaded needle. MPC postings confirm receipt. An ephemeris extends, and the bolt of night gains another measured inch. Thermal models sit at the workbench, unassuming as spools. Equilibrium lives where absorbed sunlight meets emitted warmth. Albedo, emissivity, and size determine the hand of the fabric. Sharp contrasts in temperature can pucker a seam into torque. An even field leaves the cloth smooth. We do not need exact degrees tonight. Only whether the pattern suggests a hot patch that would pull one way. Infrared files whisper neither insistence nor absence. The draft remains plain. I mark the margin. No evident pucker, and let the spool roll back into its tray. Navigation lessons are woven into the edges of our cloth as guard bands. Solar radiation pressure is one such band, always present, scaled by area to mass, falling with distance like a thread that thins as it runs out. Spacecraft designers account for it the way a tailor allows ease. Sails use it on purpose, trimming to catch or spill the light. For small, dense travellers like the one before us, the same band is decorative more than structural. The pattern acknowledges it. The seam does not yield to it. Our models include the coefficient anyway, because good fabric work hides its care in the hem, not the face. Future visitors will give the loom new patterns. We have already handled two, one that passed like a narrow ribbon, spare and strange, and another that arrived as a fuller cloth with generous fringe. More will come. Surveys designed to sweep large skies will find them, and the catalogue will learn new textures. When they arrive, we will measure the weft of their light, the warp of their motion, and test again whether the non-gravitational threads deserve to be drawn. Humility is part of the pattern. No cloth is finished. Every bolt teaches the next seam. I take a longer breath and let the long thought settle. Night after night, across latitudes and instruments, the stitches have landed within the same tidy band, and the band has narrowed as the cloth lengthened, and the lengthening has taught our hands what tension to keep and what slack to allow, so that when an alert brightens the top edge of a screen, we do not yank the thread. We check the last rows and see that they lie flat. We add the next stitch with the same wrist and shoulder, and the seam advances with a confidence that is not pride but practice, the modest, lasting kind that makes a fabric wear well long after the tailor is gone. There is room on the table for small wonders that belong to engineers. A navigation scheme learns from a night like this how little push a compact shape accepts, how error ellipses shrink when the weave includes wide fields and different looms, how a forecast of positions can be rolled and carried like a pattern card that outlives seasons. When a deep space probe's course is planned near the sun, these guard bands are not decorative. They are the selvage that keeps the cloth from ravelling, and we cut and stitch accordingly, knowing which threads to count and which to admire without measuring. A good mission, like a good blanket, warms because its weave is sound, not because its colours shout. At the far corner, a small printer relays the world in thready strips. A logline mentions another station's clear sky. A second notes a successful upload. Servers answer with a chorus of soft ticks that fall into one noise. Like rain, you only notice when it stops. The traveller advances a fraction on the screen. The seam overlays the seam. I sign the page with initials that are really just a mark to say the cloth has been checked and found even, and the night is free to continue growing on the loom at its preferred speed. Work and rest share a border, stitches and breath trade places. I glance at the wall clock, not for urgency, but for companionship. Time is another thread we place through these nights so we can return by the same path later, hands remembering where they held and why. The room's edges soften. The bolt of darkness unrolls another arm's length. The last line of the log meets the last line of the fit. One more indicator gives a patient blink and returns to steady. The woven watch keeps its count. The cloth lies flat. The seam holds, and at 03:07 the lab lights stay low and kind. We have walked a slow lane together. A small traveller moved where the charts said it would, and the night agreed. Solar monitors watched the sun's weather. Coronagraphs traced expanding fronts. A near-sun probe counted particles and fields. Farther out, infrared eyes listened for quiet warmth. On the ground, surveys and small domes took positions against catalogue stars. All those pieces met, and the seam laid flat. The numbers kept a gentle promise. Residuals fell to both sides of the line. Photometry wandered inside its usual basin. When the solar cycle grew lively, distance softened the press. Radiation pressure stayed a whisper that fades with space, strongest where light is close, smaller step by step as the miles widen. No, single push asked the path to change its mind. Color helped us follow. A faint green came from familiar molecules lit by sunlight, a waymark more than a motor. Roundness at the rim suggested balance, not torque. Perihelion kept its simple meaning, the nearest pass, without demanding drama. If a change wished to speak, it would speak in repeats, and we did not hear them. The curve held. Past visitors taught us how to look. Future ones will teach again. For tonight, the instruments kept time, the fits stayed steady, and the corridor through data remained straight enough to walk without hurry. You let your shoulders drop, and the sky did too. Thank you for keeping watch in this quiet way. One calm breath, then another, while measured work turned into measured reassurance. If sleepers come, let it keep you. If you're still awake, the lantern ahead remains where we left it, steady and small. Either way, the night continues kindly. May your rest be the same. Good night.